The death of former Zambian President Edgar Lungu, which occurred on June 5, 2025, at the age of 68 in South Africa, has shaken the country's political landscape, reigniting latent tensions and sparking a wave of emotion. However, what stands out most is not only the loss of a former head of state, but rather the reaction, or more precisely, the lack of reaction, from the sitting president, Hakainde Hichilema. His absence of an official statement or public address has stirred considerable controversy, especially among opposition figures such as Sakwiba Sikota, leader of the United Liberal Party, ULP, and chairman of the United Kwacha Alliance, UKA, as well as Socialist Party leader Dr. Fred Mamembe. According to critics, President Hichilema's silence goes beyond a simple lack of words. It carries strong political symbolism, reflecting a deep unease in the relationship between the current administration and the legacy of the former president. It is therefore essential to analyze this silence through several lenses: political, symbolic, emotional, institutional, and even strategic. Relying strictly on the provided text, this analysis seeks to explore the implications and interpretations of the president's silence. Sakwiba Sikota, during a visit to the Patriotic Front (PF) Secretariat, voiced deep concern about Hichilema's silence. His astonishment is not framed as a direct accusation but as an open question. "Tell me if I missed it, but to me, it is something that is frightening to remain silent." This kind of language conveys both a sincere concern over protocol and morality, and a political effort to highlight a presidential failure. The use of the word "frightening" by a political figure is not trivial. It suggests a serious breach of norms or even an institutional anomaly. According to Sikota, the sitting head of state cannot remain silent in the face of his predecessor's death without raising legitimate questions. This silence is seen as a moral and republican failure, a break from diplomatic etiquette, and an emotional disconnect between state institutions and the public. Through this remark, Sikota invokes a symbolic responsibility that comes with high office. Implicitly, he reminds us that the death of a former president is not a private affair but a national matter, engaging the country's history, its international image, and its internal unity. In all democracies, the death of a former president is usually marked by a national mourning protocol. A presidential speech, official condolences, flags flown at half-mast, or the organization of a state funeral are all symbolic gestures that contribute to national memory and historical reconciliation. President Hichilema's silence breaks from this tradition, creating a symbolic vacuum. This absence is not neutral. It is interpreted by some as a refusal to acknowledge the former president, even a sign of political disdain. Edgar Lungu, who led Zambia from 2015 to 2021, though controversial in some respects, remains a significant figure in the nation's modern history. Publicly refusing to comment on his death is seen by critics as a way of erasing or minimizing his role. This silence can also be read as reflecting a personal or ideological tension between Hichilema and Lungu. The two men represented opposing political visions. Lungu was from the once dominant Patriotic Front, PF, while Hichilema led the opposition for years before winning power in 2021. Their antagonism, at times intense, may explain the awkwardness in addressing the passing of a former rival. Sikota doesn't stop at merely criticizing the silence. He also calls for a future explanation. Hopefully, one day he will answer that question. With this, he elevates the president's silence into a political issue, placing it within the national debate. The idea that an explanation is owed reflects a strong democratic expectation that leaders must be accountable, even for their nonverbal actions or silences. In a system where transparency is valued, silence becomes a legitimate topic for scrutiny. This stance also serves as a critique of the current governance style, a power that, according to Sikota, avoids sensitive issues and prefers silence to openness. Thus, it's not only about mourning a former leader but also about questioning the relationship between executive power and the ethical duty to communicate with the people. Sikota goes even further, noting that this strange behavior isn't limited to the president. It is not only him who is behaving in a manner which is strange. You have ministers of years? This broadens the critique beyond Hichilema alone. It suggests a systemic unease within the state apparatus, a kind of institutional indifference or even dehumanization of governance.
This could also be interpreted as an accusation of impunity or detachment between government officials and the general population. If ministers too are silent or following a uniform line of silence, it may indicate a deliberate avoidance strategy or a deeper discomfort with Lungu's legacy. Sikota also condemns the government's behavior during the mourning period, decrying threats made against opposition members as inappropriate in such a solemn moment. In his view, this moment calls for compassion and restraint, not political intimidation. He contrasts two ideas, threats and sympathy. For him, the death of a former president should rise above political divisions and prompt a temporary political ceasefire. By allegedly targeting opposition figures during this period, the government violates a principle of decency and national unity. Sikota's critique echoes a broader expectation in democratic societies, that institutions must transcend political conflict in key moments, especially during the death of a national figure or national tragedies. The failure to respond with this kind of unity is viewed as a troubling sign for the state of democracy. Fred Mmembe offers another perspective. Perhaps President Hichilema has nothing to say to the people. This suggestion, delivered with subtle irony, raises an important hypothesis, that the silence is not accidental, but strategic. It could be an avoidance tactic, a calculated political decision, or perhaps a signal of disdain. This view gives the silence an active dimension. Choosing not to speak becomes a deliberate act, one that sends a message in itself. The president, under this reading, is not incapable of responding but is choosing not to do so. This could stem from a desire to deny legitimacy to Lungu's legacy, or from fear of opening a politically sensitive conversation. Thus, Mmembe's statement is both subtle and sharp. A president who has nothing to say to his people at such a solemn moment appears disconnected from his role. This distance between the president and the public may be one of the symptoms of a weakening democratic bond. Sikota also points out a more profound reality: there is tension in the country. This simple but powerful statement highlights a national discomfort, a social fracture that goes beyond the death of a man. This tension is fueled not only by the government's behavior but also by the way it handles the legacy of the late president. In many countries, the memory of past leaders is volatile. It crystallizes passions, ideological divisions, and historical wounds. By refusing to take part in collective remembrance and choosing silence, the current government misses an opportunity for reconciliation and national healing. The reactions of Sikota and Mmembe show that President Hichilema's silence is not simply viewed as a lack of words. It is read as a symptom, an implicit message, even an intentional political move. This silence calls into question how the presidency sees itself, how it relates to the past, and how it communicates with the nation. The death of a former president could have been a moment of national unity, collective mourning, and political transcendence. Instead, it reveals fractures between rulers and the ruled, between past and present powers, between historical memory and current governance. If there is a lesson to be learned from this episode, it is the importance of public speech in times of symbolic crisis. Silence, when poorly timed or poorly understood, can become a deafening noise, a persistent echo in the political body. And such noise can be more destabilizing than even the harshest speeches.